The cold barrel of a Winchester rifle pressed against Caleb Dawson's temple as 5 women were shoved into the dilapidated barn, their gaunt faces illuminated by the lantern's glow on that bitter December night of 1876. Their dresses hung like sacks on their emaciated frames, and their eyes, hollow with hunger and fear, followed Caleb as Jasper Miller, leader of the notorious Miller gang, grinned with yellow teeth. "Here's your payment, Dawson," Jasper sneered, gesturing toward the women. "5 of them. Take your pick or take 'em all. Consider our debt settled." Caleb felt his stomach turn. The Miller gang had promised him payment for tracking a herd of stolen cattle across 3 territories, but this was no payment. This was an atrocity. "These are people, Miller, not cattle," Caleb said, voice low and dangerous despite the gun at his head. "You can't trade human beings." "Cannon did," Jasper laughed. "Found M in that settlement that got raided by Comanche. Nobody left to claim M. They'll die without someone to feed M, and winter's coming. So what'll it be, Cowboy? Your moral high ground, or your life?" Caleb's eyes swept over the women again. One of them, a woman with copper hair despite the grime covering her face, met his gaze directly. Her chin lifted ever so slightly, a spark of defiance in her green eyes that belied her desperate condition. "Lower your weapon," Caleb said, not breaking eye contact with the red-haired woman. "I'll take them, but our business is done after this. And if I ever see you trading people again, I'll kill you myself." Jasper lowered the rifle, chuckling. "Always knew you had a soft spot, Dawson. Enjoy your harem." After Jasper and his men rode off, Caleb was left alone with 5 terrified women in a barn 20 miles from his homestead. He approached them slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "My name is Caleb Dawson. I have a ranch about a day's ride from here. I'm offering you shelter and food, nothing more. You're not my property, and you're free to leave whenever you choose." The women exchanged glances, distrust evident in their postures. Caleb sighed, removed his coat, and offered it to the woman who seemed the coldest, shivering violently in her thin dress. "What's your name?" he asked the red-haired woman who had caught his eye. "Ruth," she replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "Ruth Jenkins." The way she said it clear and proud despite her circumstances told Caleb everything he needed to know about her character. "Well, Miss Jenkins, we need to get moving before the storm hits. I've got horses outside, enough for all of you to ride." As they prepared to leave, Caleb noticed Ruth helping the weakest woman onto a horse, murmuring encouragement. There was kindness in her actions, a leadership quality that impressed him despite the dire situation. The journey to Caleb's ranch was arduous. The women, weakened by hunger and exhaustion, could barely stay on their horses. When one nearly fell, Caleb insisted she ride with him, his strong arms keeping her secure as they navigated the harsh terrain. By the time they reached his homestead, a modest but sturdy 2-story house with a large barn and several outbuildings, night had fallen, and the temperature had dropped dangerously. Caleb quickly ushered the women inside, where his housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, a widow in her 60s, was startled by the unexpected guests. "Mr. Dawson," she exclaimed, her eyes widening at the sight of 5 bedraggled women. "What in heaven's name? They need food, warm clothes, and beds." "Mrs. Holloway," Caleb interrupted. "I'll explain later." The older woman took one look at their condition and immediately began issuing orders, her initial shock giving way to efficient care. Within the hour, the women were bathed, dressed in clean nightgowns that Mrs. Holloway had stored away, and seated around the kitchen table, bowls of hot stew before them. Caleb watched from the doorway as they ate slowly at first, then with increasing desperation. Ruth, he noticed, made sure the others had started eating before taking a bite herself. Later that night, after the women had been settled into spare rooms, Caleb sat before the fire in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The door creaked open, and Ruth entered, now clean and dressed in one of Mrs. Holloway's old dresses, her copper hair gleaming in the firelight. "Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice stronger now. "I wanted to thank you." Caleb gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite him. "There's no need for thanks, Miss Jenkins. What Miller did was wrong. Nevertheless, you saved our lives." She sat, her posture straight despite her exhaustion. "Those men found us wandering after our wagon train was attacked. We were the only survivors. They said they'd take us to safety, but instead. How long were you with them? Caleb asked, his grip tightening on his glass. 2 weeks, Ruth answered, her eyes darkening with memories. They barely fed us, kept us tied up at night. They were taking us to sell in one of the mining towns when they ran into you. Caleb cursed under his breath. I'm sorry that happened to you. Ruth studied him, her green eyes shrewd. What will happen to us now? Like I said, you're free to go whenever you wish. But you're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel, or longer if you need. And what will you expect in return? Her question was blunt, her gaze unflinching. Caleb understood her suspicion. Nothing. You don't owe me anything. I'll help you contact any family you might have, arrange transportation to wherever you want to go. Ruth's shoulders relaxed slightly. The others, Mary, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Jane, they have family back east. But I. She hesitated. I have no one left. Caleb nodded, recognizing the loss in her eyes. Well, there's no rush to decide. For now, get some rest. The next morning brought clear skies and a new routine to the ranch. Mrs. Holloway, assisted by the women, prepared a hearty breakfast. Caleb was surprised to see Ruth already up and helping despite her ordeal. You should be resting, he said as he entered the kitchen. I've never been one for idleness, Mr. Dawson, she replied, flipping a pancake with unexpected skill. Besides, your Mrs. Holloway has been teaching me how to cook properly. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. The women, gaining strength from regular meals and rest, began to help around the ranch. Elizabeth, a schoolteacher before the attack, started teaching the youngest ranch hand to read. Sarah, who had worked in her father's store, proved adept at keeping inventory of the ranch supplies. Jane discovered a talent for caring for the horses, while Mary assisted Mrs. Holloway with household management. Ruth, however, surprised Caleb the most. She revealed a knowledge of ranching that he hadn't expected from a woman raised in the East. My father was a farmer in Pennsylvania, she explained one afternoon as she helped Caleb mend a fence. I grew up working the land alongside my brothers. And how did you end up on a wagon train to California? Caleb asked, handing her a nail. Ruth's expression grew distant. After my parents died of fever, my brothers joined the Union Army. They never came back from Gettysburg. I was staying with an aunt, but she passed last year. Her son, my cousin, said I had no place in their home anymore. She hammered the nail with more force than necessary. I had a friend who was heading west with her husband. They invited me to join them, start fresh in California. Caleb watched her efficient movements, admiring her strength. I'm sorry about your family. Ruth shrugged, but he could see the pain beneath her casual gesture. Life happens as it will, Mr. Dawson. We endure. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing heavy snow that isolated them from the nearest town, Caleb found himself increasingly drawn to Ruth. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving in this harsh environment. Her intelligence, resilience, and quiet humor made her stand out among the women. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, the other women having retired for the night, Ruth asked Caleb about his own past. You know my story, Mr. Dawson, but I know very little about you. Caleb stared into the flames, considering how much to share. Not much to tell. I was born in Kentucky, left home at 16 after my father remarried a woman who made it clear I wasn't welcome. Drifted west, worked cattle drives, fought in the war, saved enough to buy this place 5 years ago. And no wife. Ruth asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. Caleb smiled. No, it's a fair question. There was someone once, back in Kentucky. She married a banker while I was away at war. Probably for the best, I wasn't cut out for town life, and she wasn't made for this. He gestured to the window, where snow was falling heavily. Ruth followed his gaze. It's beautiful, though. Harsh, but beautiful. The next day, word came that a family in a neighboring homestead was sick with fever. Caleb prepared to ride out with supplies and medicine that Mrs. Holloway had stored. I'm coming with you, Ruth said, already pulling on a coat. It could be dangerous, Caleb warned. The fever, I nursed my parents and neighbors through 2 fever seasons, Ruth interrupted. I know what to do, and you'll need help carrying everything through that snow. Caleb wanted to argue, but recognized the determination in her eyes. They rode out together, the journey taking twice as long due to the deep snow. When they arrived at the Petersons' cabin, They found a desperate situation, both parents and 3 children sick, the youngest barely breathing. For 3 days, Caleb and Ruth stayed, working tirelessly to bring down fevers, changing sweat-soaked bedding, and coaxing broth into parched mouths. Caleb watched in awe as Ruth moved efficiently between patients, her gentleness with the children contrasting with her firm instructions to their parents. On the 3rd night, when the crisis had passed and all 5 Petersons were sleeping peacefully, Caleb found Ruth outside, staring up at the star-filled sky. "You're remarkable," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Ruth turned, surprised. "I only did what needed doing." "No," Caleb shook his head. "Most people run from sickness like this. You walked straight into it." "As did you," she pointed out. "Because it was my responsibility as a neighbor. And I believe we're all responsible for each other, Mr. Dawson." Her eyes held his, challenging and warm at once. "Isn't that why you took in 5 starving women rather than leaving us to Miller's mercy?" Caleb found himself moving closer, drawn by something in her expression. "I think you should call me Caleb, considering we've now faced death together." Her smile was soft in the moonlight. "Caleb, then." "And I'm Ruth." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Ruth shivered, breaking the spell. "You're cold," Caleb said, immediately removing his coat and placing it around her shoulders. "Always the gentleman," she murmured. They rode back to the ranch the next day, a new understanding between them. As winter deepened, so did their connection. Caleb found reasons to be wherever Ruth was, helping her collect eggs from the henhouse, teaching her to shoot his rifle for protection, sitting beside her at meals. The other women noticed, of course. Mary teased Ruth gently about the cowboy's attention, while Mrs. Holloway watched with knowing eyes. Even the ranch hands commented on how the boss seemed less stern these days. By February, letters had arrived for Elizabeth, Sarah, Jane, and Mary from their families. Joyful responses to the messages Caleb had sent when the first mail rider had made it through after the heavy snows. Plans were made for their departures once the spring thaw made travel possible. Ruth received no letters. There was no one to write to her, no one waiting for her return. Caleb found her one evening in the barn, absently stroking one of the horses as tears slid down her cheeks. "Ruth?" he asked gently. "What's wrong?" She quickly wiped her face. "Nothing. I'm just being foolish." Caleb stepped closer. "Tell me. The others, they're all going home soon. They have somewhere to belong." She looked up at him, vulnerability raw in her eyes. "I don't know where I'm supposed to go." Without thinking, Caleb reached out and took her hand. "Stay here." Ruth's breath caught. "As what, Caleb? Your housekeeper?" Another ranch hand. "As whatever you want to be," he said, his voice low and serious. "I've watched you these past months, Ruth. You're strong, smart, kind. You belong wherever you choose to plant yourself. And I'd be honored if you chose here." "Caleb," she whispered, her hand tightening in his. "What are you saying?" He took a deep breath, suddenly certain of what he had wanted for weeks now. "I'm saying that I care for you. That watching you face every challenge with grace and determination has made me fall in love with you. That I want you to stay, not as my employee or my charity case, but as my partner. My wife, if you'll have me." Ruth's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Caleb thought he'd misread everything. Then she smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her face. "I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "But I was afraid you still saw me as one of the women Miller tried to give you something to be rescued." Caleb shook his head firmly. "Never. From the moment you looked at me in that barn, chin up despite everything, I saw you as an equal. Someone extraordinary." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Ruth rose to meet him, her lips soft against his in a kiss that promised a future neither had dared hope for months ago. Their wedding took place in April, after the other women had departed for their homes with promises to write. It was a simple ceremony in the ranch house, with Mrs. Holloway, the ranch hands, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Ruth wore a blue dress that Sarah had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her copper hair. As they spoke their vows, Caleb marveled at how fate had brought them together, how something that had begun as an act of desperation had transformed into the greatest blessing of his life. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tenderness and passion. Ruth's initial nervousness gave way to desire as Caleb worshipped her body with gentle hands and whispered words of adoration. They moved together in the darkness, finding in each other a home neither had known was possible. "I never thought I'd find this," Ruth whispered afterward, her head on his chest. "After losing everyone, I'd resigned myself to being alone." Caleb stroked her hair, his heart full. "You'll never be alone again. I promise you that." Spring turned to summer, and the ranch thrived under their joint care. Ruth proved to be as skilled with the business side of ranching as she was with the physical work, suggesting improvements that increased their profits. They worked side by side during the day and held each other close at night, building a life that suited them both. In August, Ruth's monthly cycle didn't come. By September, she was certain enough to share the news with Caleb. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Ruth covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," he answered, kissing her deeply. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted: a partner, a future, and now a family." As Ruth's body changed with the growing child, Caleb found new reasons to fall deeper in love with her. He marveled at her strength as she continued her duties despite morning sickness, admired the glow of her skin and the fullness of her breasts, and listened with wonder as she spoke of her hopes for their child. "If it's a girl," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I want her to be strong like you, brave enough to face whatever comes." "And if it's a boy," Caleb replied, his hand on her rounded belly, "I want him to have your compassion and intelligence." They received letters from the other women throughout this time. Elizabeth had resumed teaching and was being courted by a local doctor. Sarah had taken over her father's store and expanded it successfully. Jane had married a horse breeder she'd met on her journey home, while Mary had reunited with a childhood sweetheart. "They all found their way," Ruth said after reading the latest letters. "Just as we did." Winter came again, harsher than the previous year. In January, when Ruth was 7 months along, a blizzard struck without warning. Caleb had been checking the farthest pasture when it hit, and Ruth spent agonizing hours waiting for his return, fearing the worst. When he finally stumbled through the door, half frozen but alive, she fell into his arms weeping. "I thought I'd lost you too," she cried. "Never," he promised, holding her tight despite his numbness. "I'll always come back to you and our child." That night, after Caleb had warmed by the fire and eaten the stew Ruth had kept hot for him, they lay in bed listening to the howling wind outside. The baby kicked vigorously, as if assuring them both of its presence. "This child is a fighter," Caleb laughed, feeling the movement beneath his palm. "Like its parents," Ruth agreed. On a clear morning in March 1878, after 18 hours of labor with Mrs. Holloway serving as midwife, Ruth gave birth to a daughter. Exhausted but triumphant, she placed the squalling infant in Caleb's trembling hands. "Meet your daughter," she said, watching his face transform with wonder. Caleb stared down at the tiny red face, the wisps of copper hair so like her mother's, and felt his heart expand impossibly further. "She's perfect," he whispered. "What shall we name her?" Ruth smiled, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "Hope, because that's what she represents for both of us." "Hope Dawson." Caleb tested the name, then nodded. "It's perfect." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch expanded as Caleb and Ruth's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread. Hope grew into a spirited child with her mother's red hair and her father's blue eyes, equally at home on horseback or helping Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen. When Hope was 2, Ruth gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Joseph, who inherited their father's height and their mother's determination. The house, once so empty that Caleb's footsteps echoed, now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Caleb and Ruth would sit on the porch like they had in the early days, marveling at how far they'd come. "Do you ever think about that night?" Ruth asked once, "when Miller brought us to that barn." Caleb nodded, taking her hand. "I think about how close I came to missing all of this. If I hadn't been there, if you hadn't been so strong." "It's strange," Ruth mused. "That moment was one of the worst of my life, but it led to everything good. Life happens as it will." Caleb quoted her words from years ago. "We endure." Ruth smiled, leaning against his shoulder. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we don't just endure. We thrive. On their 10th wedding anniversary, with Hope now 9 and the twins 7, Caleb surprised Ruth with a trip to San Francisco, a city she had once dreamed of seeing when she joined that ill-fated wagon train. As they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, the setting sun painting the water gold, Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Are you happy, Ruth Dawson?" he murmured against her ear. She turned in his embrace, her face as beautiful to him now as it had been when he first saw her, perhaps more so for the life they had lived together etched in the fine lines around her eyes. "Happiness doesn't begin to describe it," she said, her green eyes holding his. "What I feel is gratitude, joy, love for you, for our children, for the life we've built." "When Miller presented you 5 women as payment," Caleb said, his voice solemn, "he thought he was giving me possessions. He couldn't understand that what he really gave me was the chance to meet the love of my life. And what he gave me," Ruth replied, "was the man who would see me truly see me when I was at my lowest. Who would offer me choice when I had none, respect when I had been treated as less than human, and eventually, a love I never dreamed possible." As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Caleb kissed his wife deeply, pouring into that kiss the devotion of a decade and the promise of decades more to come. Later that night, in the luxury of a hotel room so different from the simple bedroom they shared at home, they made love with the passion of newlyweds and the profound connection of partners who had faced life's harshest challenges together and emerged stronger. "I love you, Ruth Dawson," Caleb whispered as she drifted towards sleep in his arms. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. And I love you," she murmured back, her voice thick with emotion. "My cowboy, my savior, my heart." In the years that followed, the Dawson Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its cattle, but for its hospitality. Travelers, immigrants, and those down on their luck knew they could find a meal and fair work there. Caleb and Ruth never turned away someone in need, remembering always how their own love story had begun with an act of compassion in desperate circumstances. Hope grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's spirit and her father's business sense. The twins became the backbone of the ranch operations, innovating and expanding with their parents' blessing. And Caleb and Ruth, partners in every sense, watched their legacy flourish, secure in the knowledge that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone. On cool evenings, they still sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, watching the sun set over the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. It all began with 5 starving women and 1 stubborn cowboy, Ruth would sometimes say, her voice soft with memory. And Caleb would smile, pressing a kiss to her temple. "No," he would correct gently. "It began with 1 extraordinary woman who refused to be broken, and a man lucky enough to recognize the treasure before him."